It's time for It's a Crime. To dig beneath the surface and into the criminal mind. These are stories of people who aren't who we thought they were. People who turned to the dark side and chose betrayal and bloodshed. Your host, Margaret McLean, is a former prosecutor and author of true crime mystery. This is her world.
Welcome back to It's a Crime. I'm your host, Margaret McLean. This is episode 2 of the Anna Walshe missing persons case. Last episode, I left off with an intense ground search for Anna. At that point, she'd been missing for 6 days, and multiple law enforcement agencies were searching for her. They were using helicopters and a team of canines. But as each day passed, unfortunately, it's not looking good for her. That she'll be found alive, and I'm sure they'll be using cadaver dogs. And we'll go back out in the field to explain exactly how these dogs search for dead bodies. But let's first talk about that fire. I mean, her former home was engulfed in flames. They just sold that within the past year. How bizarre is that? Just look at the timeline here. Anna went missing on Sunday, January 1st. And she was reported missing on January 4th. The fire breaks out at 2:15 in the afternoon on January 6th. I went to the scene of the fire and I couldn't stop thinking about it. I wondered if there was a connection to Anna and the fact that she'd just vanished into thin air. Remember, she went cyber silent. There was no communication with her family, children, husband, friends, and coworkers. And the mystery thickens because I learned that Anna's husband, Brian, is awaiting sentencing in federal court. So let's check into that first, because that's exactly what investigators did in this case. So I went to federal court in Boston and pulled the file, and I couldn't believe what I saw. Brian Walshe pled guilty to multiple charges of fraud, and that would be art fraud, dealing with the fraudulent selling of Andy Warhol paintings. Here's a page right out of the file. The crime was devious, complicated, and planned. Walshe committed this crime over many years, from 2011 through 2016. He traveled to multiple countries. He enlisted multiple artists to prepare fake paintings with multiple lies. He involved private galleries, auction houses, and even eBay in his scheme. He manipulated and stole from people who trusted him, welcomed him into their homes, and considered him a close friend. So here's the story. Brian had a best friend from South Korea who wanted to remain anonymous, so I'm just going to call him Liam. So their friendship goes all the way back to college, when they were freshmen at Carnegie Mellon in 1994. After college, Liam invited Brian to South Korea multiple times, where he stayed with his family. Now, these people welcomed Brian with open arms, yet Brian noticed they had an extensive collection of valuable artwork, and at some point he decided to con them out of it. So Brian attended Liam's wedding, and I can totally picture this. He probably had that charming smile on his face, and he said, "Hey, I can sell some of this artwork for you. I'll make you a lot of money." So Liam handed over 2 very valuable Andy Warhol shadow paintings. Plus, Liam also gave Brian a $40,000 Warhol dollar sign painting and 2 valuable paintings similar to these by the artist Keith Haring. And just like that, Brian takes the art back to Boston and stops talking to his friend. Just to give you an idea of what really goes on inside that criminal mind, Brian had a diary and it was recovered by the FBI, and it's included in the federal file. I have a plan to sell the art, to get off with some good pieces, need to sell the shadows. I will take all the money and then only a taste of everything else. I will make this deal work. They have stuff that is good and his family is all about themselves. Makes it easy for me to do them up. Stole his AP watch. Put watch on eBay. Sold watch for $12,000. And the scheme continues, for Brian goes to New York City and he finds an artist who makes near-perfect replicas of the Andy Warhol paintings. Brian took those fake paintings and duped a 63-year-old retiree from Paris who paid $145,000 for those fake Andy Warhol paintings. And after stealing that money, Brian's credit card receipt shows that he went on a big shopping spree, and boy does he love Prada. In the meantime, his friend Liam from South Korea called Brian multiple times because he wanted his family's artwork back. Do you think Brian ever returned any of Liam's phone calls? Not a chance. So in the meantime, Brian gets even greedier. He has a second artist make another set of fake Andy Warhol paintings. And then he puts them on eBay, of all places, for $100,000. So Ron Rivlin is an art dealer. He saw them and he wanted to buy them. He's the owner of a swanky art gallery on Sunset Boulevard in LA. He offered to pay $80,000 and struck a deal with Brian. So Rivlin's assistant traveled to Boston with a certified check. So Brian gives her the paintings, the fakes, of course, and deposits that certified check into his bank account in order to pay off credit card debt that he had racked up for luxury travel and expensive restaurants. He also made cash withdrawals. The next day, Mr. Rivlin realized he'd been conned because there was no Warhol Foundation stamp on the backs of them. And he was livid. He called Brian over and over, and of course, does Brian answer his phone calls? Absolutely. So Rivlin figured out Anna's number, called her, and threatened to go to the police. Can you imagine being his wife and getting that phone call? I mean, Anna must have really freaked. I think she put pressure on Brian because he refunded Ron Rivlin $30,000. Speaking of Ron Rivlin, I have to let you guys know that his home was destroyed in the Palisades fire. He lost over 200 pieces of iconic art, including about 30 Andy Warhols. What a tragedy. You know, my heart goes out to everyone who suffered losses in those fires. Anyway, Rivlin was upset because Brian Walshe conned him out of $50,000. So what does he do? He goes straight to the FBI, and thank God, because you wonder how many other people Brian would have ultimately conned. As a result, Brian was charged with a slew of federal crimes. The FBI also wanted to know where the real Andy Warhol paintings were. Brian claimed he didn't have them, and federal prosecutors believe they're still in his possession somewhere. In a motion before the court, the prosecutor wrote, "They've never been recovered, and as a result of this fraud, those iconic paintings will likely never grace the wall of a gallery or museum again." If you think about it, Brian Walshe has ripped us all off. Ultimately, the government built a strong case, and boy, were they geared up for trial. At the time of Anna's disappearance, Brian was awaiting sentencing. So now we know that Brian had a dark side. But does that mean he was responsible for Anna's disappearance? I mean, it's certainly a red flag to me. So the search for Anna intensified, and as I mentioned, they used cadaver dogs. As promised, we're going to learn about these dogs from Sergeant Bobby DeLito, the canine supervisor at Brockton PD.
Where the cadaver dogs come in is you see those dogs that are like on the front of a boat with their head over the boat and they're smelling. Well, those are the gases that are coming up from the water. Somebody was dumped overboard and they got bricks and they're at the bottom of the ocean, or bottom of the lake rather. And as they're decaying, the gases are coming up. Those dogs are looking for that. Same thing where if a person was buried out in the woods and they're out there decaying, cadaver dog would come in handy for something like that. As we talked about earlier, the area searches, there's no tracking involved. It's just you're sending the dog out looking for human odor, right? So the more Kilo works the street tracking real people, the better he becomes at it. The more building searches, and he's out there in live environments looking and doing area searches, the better they become. No matter how much we try to recreate training as real as possible, nothing is ever the same as real world apprehending a suspect that's combative, finding the missing child out there, real drugs hidden in a real drug dealer's house. Some of the trainers are under the opinion that a patrol dog that's trained in human odor, detecting human odor, would actually be better than a cadaver dog who's just looking for the gases of a deceased person that hasn't had a lot of live work.
Well, that was intriguing. I can't thank Bobby and the canine crew in Brockton enough. And of course, a big shout out to Kilo and Hawk. The search for Anna continued. The dogs did not pick up on any scent. So what's next? The police started interviewing Brian, Anna's co-workers, family, and friends. They investigated the suspicious fire and analyzed phone records for both Brian and Anna. The more they uncovered, the darker the case became. Sadly, it doesn't look good for Anna Walshe. In the next episode, we'll dive into that investigation. In the meantime, check out my website at itsacrimemedia.com and my podcast at It's a Crime with Margaret McLean. Lots of episodes to choose from. You can find those on Apple, Spotify, or wherever you listen to your podcasts. And please subscribe to my YouTube channel. Once again, I'm your host, Margaret McLean. Thank you so much for listening to It's a Crime.